welcome our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world as we start the final business and trading day in July here on Business Morning. I am Boostin Amofaye here at Channel's global headquarters in Lagos. Nigeria's debt sustainability has been a recurring topic for discussion, even as the country looks to raise another $2.8 billion from the international marketplace to fund the 2018 budget. Now, the concerns around the state of Nigeria's debt portfolio seems to be getting louder as we inch closer to another political transition period. Let's go live to our Abuja studios for some updates and insights into the country's debt position and the marketplace. Patience Oniha, the Director General at the Debt Management Office, is flagging up today's program for us. Good morning, madam, and it's good to have you on the program today. Now, let's go straight to business. Do you think that political risk will dominate the debt market in the second half of the year, where we are right now?
I think when you talk about political risk there, I mean, I would imagine that you are referring to probably the comments and analysis. But as far as the debt stock is concerned and the borrowing activities that have been approved for the Debt Management Office to undertake, we don't see a risk here because investors will really be looking at the fundamentals of the economy. And the fundamentals of the economy, all the indices are trending upwards. We know about external reserves that has exceeded 45 billion US dollars. Inflation has been on a very steady decline since last year. And the recent analysis, the MPC communique, did also have some economic indications, so indices rather. So we're not worried about the politics impacting on our borrowing activities.
Where are we really on sustainability issues around the country's current debt portfolio, both national and subnational?
Okay, I think the first statement I would like to make is that Nigeria's debt is sustainable. Sustainable in the short, in the medium, and in the long term, to the extent that we can keep servicing the debt as and at when due. They are sustainable. And let me quickly add that, first of all, Nigeria's debt is driven by a debt management strategy. And the whole objective of having a strategy in mind is to determine in advance how you would borrow, what forms of borrowing to achieve some specific objectives. So the objectives of the debt management strategy, the principal objective is that debt should be sustainable. So for that purpose, we have a debt to GDP ratio, a total public debt to GDP ratio, and that includes the debt of the states. Okay, the second objective of the debt management strategy is to ensure that borrowing is prudent at the lowest possible cost and that the debt stock is stable. So that principle, as enshrined in the strategy, which was duly approved, is what guides our borrowing. Okay, so let's go specific. Is debt sustainable? Certainly, absolutely sustainable. And the recent publication by the Debt Management Office of the Debt Sustainability Analysis for 2017 is basically an exercise to look at the debt figures as they are now, look at the future, taking into account various statistics on revenue, on budgets, on growth, on inflation, on foreign exchange, external reserves, and exchange rate, put that together and project into the next 20 years and say, what is the outcome of that? Will debt be sustainable? And we look at different scenarios. The simple one, of course, is to assume that all things remain constant. But the complex one is to say, let's assume that all the indices weaken. What would happen to debt? Is this still sustainable? And the outcome shows that it is sustainable. As would be expected, by the time you project crude oil prices at below $30 per barrel and production at only 1.4 million barrels per day, certainly your revenues wouldn't be looking so good. And the indices, the ratios in terms of debt to GDP, debt service to revenue, would weaken. So that's like looking at it extremely. Weaken, but does not mean that we're in any situation of distress or that we cannot service the debt. So that exercise is actually positive. It is an exercise that Nigeria decided to do voluntarily. It's an IMF-driven template, and we do it annually to be sure that we're not just saying it, making claims that debt is not sustainable, that everything is okay. We actually shock the figures, look 20 years ahead, to be able to advise government and reassure the public that debt is sustainable.
That's at the national level. Are there concerns about the subnationals? And of course, this is part of being a little bit of a fine line there that the IMF sometimes refer to, that the Nigerian authorities need to watch subnationals' debt levels. Is this something the DMO, the debt office, is worried about?
I think worry, I would say worry is not the factor we're looking at now. Worry will be that do we have a process for ensuring that borrowing, and when I'm talking borrowing here, it's either borrowing from the bond market, borrowing from commercial banks. Is there a process to ensure that there's some control around it with the overall objective of ensuring that the debt of the state governments is sustainable? And I would say yes, there's actually a circular on our website, the website of the Debt Management Office, that prescribes the basis and the process by which subnational governments can borrow. Okay, so are most of them compliant? Are they within the threshold? Absolutely. So what that circular says, it ensures that both the executive and the legislature at the state levels are involved in that borrowing by giving their approvals. It also requires that we test their debt service. Okay, so they have debts already running for which there are debt service obligations. So for any new borrowing, we test their debt service existing and the new one, the debt service on the new one they want to take, and then check, measure that against their revenue, their average revenue for 6 months. If that ratio is higher than 40%, that approval will be declined. So there is a limit for the states, the subnationals. It is 40%. The maximum debt service is 40% to their revenue, average revenue for the preceding 6 months. And we do comply with that. And because most of them are backed by deductions from their FAC, which we call irrevocable standing payment order, which has to be given by the Honorable Minister. Before the Honorable Minister approves any new borrowing for states, that is done, including for external debt. Okay, so for external debt, they can't go directly and borrow. It is the sovereign that borrows on their behalf, for which it also gets an ISPO as required by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So that whole process before the debt is contracted, a debt sustainability analysis is conducted before an approval is given. And I dare say that the states are complying and we're doing what we need to do. But don't forget there's also a fiscal program for the state governments, which was, I believe, approved sometime in 2016, to ensure that some of the things that we do at the center, not only on debt, but on managing costs, on transparency, publishing accounts, increasing revenue, that they also comply. So all of those are working together to ensure that at the subnational levels, debt is sustainable.
Part of what you spoke about earlier, Madam Director General, is about restructuring. And this was about September last year. We're technically 1 year into that, when the Ministry of Finance and, of course, the debt office, including the central bank, talked about restructuring Nigeria's debt portfolio because of the external environment, to take advantage of that and reduce government pressure on the local market. Is that program still on course as we speak?
Oh, absolutely. The Federal Executive Council and the National Assembly approved that we should raise $3 billion to refinance domestic debt. And the $3 billion has been raised. We raised $500 million in November 2017, and then $2.5 billion in February. Okay, so from December, starting with the $500 million we raised in November, we have been redeeming treasury bills. And we redeemed the entire maturity in December. And from March, after we got the proceeds of the 2.5, we have been redeeming treasury bills as they mature. Okay, we simply staggered it so that we don't collapse the market. The market is for other players and also for us. So from December till June, we have actually redeemed over 830 billion naira of Nigerian treasury bills. So technically, all of those funds are in the system. They have been released to the investors, be they banks, be they pension funds, insurance companies. An expectation is that those funds are now in the market for lending to the real sector, because that is our objective, objective one, I should say. The second point, which is beneficial to the economy as a whole and the government, is that with that liquidity, like I said, over 800 billion naira pumped into the system, interest rates have dropped. The FGN rates are the benchmark rates. Our rates dropped from about 18.5% in January 2017. Now we're borrowing at anywhere between 11 and 14%, which is significant. It means since our benchmark rate has dropped, our cost of borrowing in the domestic market has dropped. But more importantly, it means any corporate who issues bonds or commercial paper can do that at a lower rate. And that speaks to the entire economic strategy of ensuring that the private sector can access funds and contribute to their development. But let me quickly add that the debt management strategy, which you made reference to at the beginning, talked about having an external debt to domestic debt ratio of 40% to 60%. As we speak, with the implementation of that strategy, we, as at March, which is the latest debt data available, we are now actually at 30% of external debt and 70% of domestic. From where we're coming in 2015, that's a long haul. We were at 15% previously, and now we're at 30 to 70. So that is significant. And like we said, the whole idea is to achieve some economic objectives, reduce the cost of borrowing, extend the tenor profile of the debt, make more funds available for other borrowers in the system.
One of the key issues that we currently face is the 2018 budget, and part of the funding will require borrowings from the local and international marketplace, Eurobond, $2.8 billion US. How soon do you think the debt office, the Ministry of Finance, and everyone in the loop will be able to hit the marketplace for these debt raisings to fund this very expansionary budget, almost 10 trillion naira?
I think where we are, we already started the process. As you know, it's a bit of, in terms of approvals, it's a bit of a lengthy process. But we already started the process way back about April in terms of appointing transaction parties. Okay, now the budget has been approved rather. The next stage is getting the resolution as we require of the National Assembly. So if I may just pick up the top of my head, that should be in, all things being equal, it should be in the third quarter of this year. All things being equal.
All things being equal. But again, you have a number of liquidity management issues to deal with, isn't it, in the second half? The central bank, you alluded to that in your earlier comments about the opening up of the commercial paper markets and a bit of via the CRR backdoor for the banking system. So if you add to the collectionary spending, that's a lot of liquidity that will be coming on the streets in the second half of this year, which we're already 1 month into that. What's your outlook on liquidity management during this period?
I think that has been very clearly articulated by the central bank. And if I read their objectives very well, it is a way of ensuring that capital funds get into the real sector rather than being in government securities, because now the government has said we need to refund some of that money to make funds available in the system. So I think it's a macro objective. The central bank is pursuing the same macro objective of the government to make more funds available for production. So if those funds go into real business, real production, they generate employment, I think overall it should be good for Nigeria.
A final question, Madam Director General. Why are bids falling and rates trending slightly higher? Since April are the Naira bond auctions. Are local investors getting a little bit saturated with these month-on-month offerings?
Okay, I think the month-on-month offering is fairly typical in our character, I should say. And we've been offering actually less of treasury bills, like I say, because we've been redeeming 50% fairly consistently at every maturity, which is about twice a month. Why the rate started inching up, as you rightly observed, if you check some of the liquidity management policies of the central bank, so they've been very active with open market operations, technically mopping up. So sometimes you have them mop up a day before the auction, and that reflects on the level of liquidity in the system the next day. And depending on the rates at which the OMO bills are issued, that also impacts on the treasury bill rate. But it is clearly a liquidity management policy of the central bank.
Madam Director General at the Debt Management Office, we thank you very much for coming by on the program today and update us on some of the issues you've talked about. Patience Oniha, the Director General at the Debt Management Office from Abuja Studios. Coming up, what's new about the Buhari's medium and small enterprises? There's a new recognition for companies that excel within the industry. That's coming next on Business Morning.